Record to the cloud. All right. We are live. And so
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we always have this moment because working groups technically don't have a chair.
yeah.
Um, but I'm happy to kind of jump in. So, um, thank you, Darren, for setting up the link for us so we can have our second meeting of the State Board Authority Working Group. Per our last meeting, we talked about going back and revisiting just some of the questions we were trying to answer from the governance, not the recommendations themselves, but a little bit of background on the information we explored. Does that still sound right to everyone? And or are there other uh, items that we should add to the agenda for today before we get started? Okay. I'm happy to put in the chat the link to the board governance website because I think it's probably the most helpful resource. It does go beyond the recommendations themselves. And if it's helpful to folks, I'm just going to kind of give a voiceover of like the questions we explored, some of the things we heard from the public and the experts we interviewed, and then what some of the things we heard from them, which is why we then made the recommendations. I'm not going to talk through the recommendations themselves because you all have seen the recommendations, you're familiar with the recommendations. I feel like that would be a bit redundant. So when we set out to do the board governance work, initially the question we were asking was about like the pain points in the system. And so we literally went to folks and we said, hey, like, how are you currently experiencing the system? How well do you feel the system incorporates feedback into decision-making processes? If there are like pervasive issues or concerns that they wanted to elevate, and if they could change things about the decision-making structure, what could it be? For like some of the questions we asked. But then we also asked them to define more broadly, like what successful governance looks like. And folks, we did a couple different things. So we did do surveys. We also did working groups, and we had surveys. We had focus groups, not working groups. And so when we did the initial focus group report, which is linked on this website and is worth opening up, there were a couple things that came out of the focus group report that then made it like, I guess these are like the pre recommendations. I'm gonna talk about, I think, the key findings because those were the things that we then used to that we felt the need to address. So the key findings were six things. One was there were two main education system level concerns, which included quality of education and mental health and behavioral support. Two, many participants are aware of most DC education government agencies or offices by name, but they are not aware of their specific roles within the education system. And there is little awareness of agencies and offices. Let me see if it's helpful if I can share my screen. Oh no, I can't share because I'm not the host, Aaron.
Yeah,
Or if you,
I can share. Do you want me to go into the government's report
no,
or
I'm in the
the
key.
focus group?
I'm gonna paste it in exactly where I am.
Okay.
And because literally we wanted to talk about what we were solving for. Um, I'll keep reading, but that'll show you exactly where I am.
Sure. And
Um,
I also made you co-host too, if you want to share your screen.
and then the third thing was participants perceived the governance system and structures to be overwhelming, difficult to navigate, even for the most informed and involved parents and caregivers. They said four, increased clarity on the system hierarchy. For increased clarity on the system hierarchy and which agency to contact, including specific contact information for certain issues, would improve parent and caregiver engagement. 5, participants voice the need for more streamlined approach to communication, more opportunities to give feedback, greater transparency for how feedback is utilized. And then 6, community-based engagement by SBOE is key to raising their visibility and leverage as a trusted source. The reason we did these focus groups in particular was to oversample after as we did the surveys too, but to oversample from populations who were most likely to not respond to a survey. So we're talking about families who have special needs. We're talking about folks in 7 and 8. We also focused the focus groups on people whose first language was not English, and we asked them literally the same questions that we asked in the bigger engagements, and allowed them to kind of expound upon the surveys to kind of offset any overrepresentation from different groups. One of the reasons that we had the idea to do this was because when we met with Office of Racial Equity at the very beginning of the project, we talked to them about what success would look like from an engagement standpoint. So we tried to set metrics as far as like who we needed to hear from, like how many people was a representative sample, and what were techniques and strategies that we could utilize to then reach out to those folks, since we know they don't typically respond. And so out of all of that engagement, these 6 things were the things that folks said were their pain points and were the things that they wanted to solve for. We then took those 6 things and discussed recommendations that would address those 6 things, which is then where the governance recommendations came from themselves. So I'll stop there as far as just like the background on like the how we got there and what they were. Tell me, like, ask me questions. Tell me if that makes sense. Or if there was something else that was like more helpful to kind of give some background on.
Yeah, so I think what I'm most interested in is like connecting the dots between the feedback and then the 3 recommendations that we're looking at. So if you could say more about that, that would be helpful.
Yeah, so I put in, I think Darren is allowing me to share now. So when you go to get the exact page. When you go to the governance report itself, let me see about the sharing. Stand by.
If not, I can pull it up.
Can you see it or no?
We can't.
Wait a minute, it's starting to broadcast now.
Okay.
Can you see the PDF? Is that on the screen?
No, it's showing a different window.
Okay, not the right window. I don't know how to make it show what window, so maybe you should do it, Darren, because I got a million.
No, I can absolutely do that. Give me one moment.
Nothing I'm particularly ashamed of, but there's a million windows open.
Give me one moment. Bernice is joining.
Oh.
She's in Teams. Let me just help her and.
Okay. I can also try again. I don't know how to make it show this exact window.
I have it pulled up if you want to just say page numbers.
Yeah, so I'm in the report. I do think it's also helpful to share, but I'm in the report and I'm on page, wait, this is the focus group report. So I'm starting on page 9 with like the takeaways. And then if you go to, there's a chart. So recommendation by recommendation, actually, let's not go to page 9. Let's start with page 13. So for each recommendation, we said, here's the recommendation, here's the context and problem that needs to be addressed, and then these are the tie-ins. And so the takeaway itself, like it'll say, community members from across DC came to bring up these issues. So which ties back to like the first takeaway. Like we said, which problems folks elevated and why it addresses them. And then we kind of laid out for each governance consideration what steps would be needed for implementation. We laid out how long we thought the runway should be to be able to take action. And then we also defined potential examples of implementation success. And so the ones we, I guess, are looking at for this working group are going to be recommendation number 1, which is initiating policy. It's going to be recommendation number 2, which is the affording the policy great weight. And then what was the last one? It was the data requests, expand the state board's authority to request data, which is representation, which is number 5. And so maybe it's helpful for folks to take a moment and look at those 3 pages. And we can kind of talk through like where they agree with those things, where they see challenges, if it makes sense. But we literally did that for each recommendation. Does that answer your question, Robert? Does that speak to?
We're looking at 13, 14, and 15 here.
Yeah, so we're looking at pages, let me scroll back up. We're looking at pages 13, 14, and
14 was the website.
it's 17.
Yeah.
It's 13, 14, and 17.
Thanks. That is what.
Okay. I think, yeah. So I'm glad that answered your question. But I feel like folks, one of the things I didn't want to get lost was I think sometimes people assume we started from a place of we want to, we already had our recommendations in place, but that's not what we did. We actually worked from, here's what the public said they are experiencing, and gave people essentially just an open forum to talk about like common issues they were having, because most folks don't speak in governance. Most folks bring up symptoms of why they can't navigate or why they have trouble experiencing effective responsiveness from, our education system. And so we kind of reverse map to make it a little bit more accessible, and then said what recommendations would solve for these things.
And also that, just going back to the website itself that you shared, it's a good way to backwards map a lot of this work. So just how it led to these recommendations and what you said earlier, Ebony and Rose. I think there's also a graphic further up that kind of shows the initial feedback, key takeaways, and then finally the recommendations. And then following this, having the panel of experts to then react to each of those recommendations.
Yeah, so like we used a pretty iterative process. We can also share with folks, because I don't know if it's posted, probably it's posted publicly, like the actual work plan. So the governance, the subsite of governance on our state board website, what it does is it kind of retrospectively says, okay, here's what we did this day, here's what we did that day. Like here's the highlights of the work. But there is a fuller work plan which says like, this builds on this, this builds on this, if that's a helpful way for folks to look at it too. And that's just an Excel sheet. But I find it helpful to kind of track the work.
Oh, I see Bernice is in the room. Give me one moment. Let me just make sure I'm letting her in. Do you want me to go back to sharing my screen on that? Was there anything else you wanted to touch on, Ebony Rose? I think that's
No, I mean, I don't think there's like, I don't want to talk at people the whole time, but I don't think there's anything else that isn't like present in the materials. I guess my first question would be like, I know Robert said that was helpful to him. If there are other things that would be helpful to know about like the process or what we covered, because I don't want to just dump information on you of like a year of processy things, because that would be maybe not as helpful, but I do want to share as much background information as helpful, that is as helpful as possible.
I think I'm good now on this process and being able to see, what are what was the problem that these recommendations are
Oh.
aiming to fix. And I do have some other just examples, kind of outside of this, which I can add now or later.
Yeah,
Should I
I
just
mean,
go ahead.
yeah, I think my question would be, because as somebody who was, I don't want to take for granted that I was very much immersed in the process. It's like, as you look at this, as people who were not, like don't have the same like authorship around it, does it make sense? Like, does the logic make sense, or are there things that are missing from this, or like holes in our thinking that we didn't explore? Like, does the why we said we wanted these things, does it follow? I don't want to take that for granted.
I do think that there's like another level. So like uh this is largely like the problems that people are encountering and then what the system is doing. And like in between that is like the board and its members trying to navigate that and trying to make those connections. So like when a constituent brings a problem with, for example, like a charter school, and as a board member, like we don't have any authority over the charter schools, yet we're still trying to serve our constituents, try to help them. So then what are the tools that we have or do not have to help them? And so um, I I do think like the recommendations that we're looking at now speak a little bit more to that middle layer of like what can a board member do in order to address the problems that the people are bringing up. Um, so, for example, to be able to ask for data or to be able to reach out to the charter school board or a not just the PCSB, but an individual charter schools board of directors, you know, for example, the Great Weight idea, like does the school individual schools board have an obligation to respond to a state board member?
Representative Gulay, what do you think?
Well, I think, I mean, on this one, you're thinking on what Representative Henderson said about whether they're required to respond or not, or just generally?
Well, I think both. I think asking
So,
I'm asking for feedback on,
okay,
since we thought what we did as a committee when we produced this report was to connect the things that people elevated to us as challenges. We thought that these were the actionable solutions. And I think I'm asking, based on these 3 slides for these 3 recommendations, does that follow? Like,
yeah, I'd be glad to go through them one at a time here. If
okay.
that's easy. So, I mean, on the first one, I actually would start with a question on this. We have in here authorizing the state board to initiate policy. Is that anticipating us doing the work. So let's say we want to do phys ed standards, for example.
Mhm.
And that's under our statutory authority. Is this stating that we would basically do a resolution requiring OSSI to initiate the work, or would our staff initiate it ourselves? How is that envisioned?
And
I think,
can I
oh,
jump
go
in
ahead.
too? Ebony Rose, when you were pointing out in the report, and I could actually share my screen, part of that governance report also included considerations for implementation. I think you mentioned that earlier, Ebony
Yes.
Rose, but these are some of the things that we were thinking about on what it would look like to actually implement these recommendations. And maybe this working group could do an even deeper dive into this, but this is just surface level. How would you get that enacted? So for example, amending or updating DC code
And we
get.
do mention the ability to amend directly in here, which was something that, I mean, that was the one thing that was enticing to me, was the ability of our board to be able to amend the resolutions that come down versus just voting up or down. But, you know, I'm just trying to still picture, I mean, I feel like OSSI is the one who should be doing the work on this, given their just larger staff capacity. I mean, what did we envision with this? Did we envision it to be, if we initiated something, that our team does the work, or are we just basically saying OSSI's got to get going and do the work on it?
We had not outlined a process. I think the vision was that, and I'll use the financial literacy standards as an example. And so when it's something that is in our current purview and responsibility, like standards, when we are hearing from the public over and over that this is something that's missing, there would be some mechanism that needed to be designed, right? Like we didn't design the mechanism for us to be able to say, hey, OSSI, we need to put financial literacy standards in the queue for work for the board. What at that time, so I would say prior, when I first, not prior, I can't speak for prior to, when I first joined the board, one of the questions I had as a member was, how do I know what work is coming down the pipe? Like if I wanted to look a year out or 2 years out, why don't we know, what our work will be with OSSI? Because essentially the same thing you're identifying, Eric, on the OSSI side of things was true on our side, where it was just like, all right, we're going to do this now, and we have to make the time and space for it. Now, at that time, we also did not have Kathleen as a staff member. And I would say OSSI and us both need more capacity around things like standards design. That being said, what we, I think, envision and started to put into place without this is some type of cross-functional thing with OSSI where we could like discuss those things and talk about the capacity, but we would at least have the power to pass a resolution or some mechanism where the board voted and said with one voice that this should be considered and initiated. Like we should start working on this. Not necessarily managing OSSI or saying like it has to be, by this timeline. Like clearly we would have to work with them, with their staff to actualize it. But I think what was initially envisioned was us being able to say, we have to put this on the table, and then some way for us to then work out with OSSI an agreed timeline.
And can I jump in there too? That email I sent early this afternoon, some of that feedback was like giving power and voice to parents. And so thinking through that mechanism, but like what that might look like, but that's just one way to elevate that up for things that are on constituents' minds and then raising that up if it's in the purview of the state board.
Because what happened, or what has been happening, and I'll stick with financial literacy standards, is if there is no interest from OSSI, despite there being a push from the public or even other elected members, like a council member, either you get one or two things. Either there's no action or folks start to take action and legislate what kids should be learning. And that's not great either, because what we saw with, and it wasn't just financial literacy standards, we saw this with African-American history. Like we had a council member put forth legislation that required African American history in schools, absent of the larger considerations of what students learn along the social studies pathway. Now, is it well intentioned? Absolutely. And I personally, I'll speak for myself. I personally definitely believe that, especially as a city with as many Black children as we have, they should be learning about themselves, and people should know the rich African American experience. But when we, as people who are actually responsible for things like standards, for literally the trajectory of what kids learn, that should be with the board. And when we have folks who go outside of feel because they either can't trust the agency or no one has the authority to say, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, you end up with bad policies or other solutions. Like if the only thing you have is a hammer, everything becomes a nail. And yeah, the council legislating curriculum was not awesome.
I agree on not wanting council to legislate curriculum. I mean, I think there's several paths that we could go on this recommendation. I mean, one path would be you're just continuing the great relationship that you developed with OSSI. I think we have a back and forth right now in a dialogue where we don't have an issue. I mean, I could see that being a problem in the future, though, if you had a situation where OSSI either didn't listen to you on one hand and refused to do what we wanted, like you mentioned, it happened with the previous board, or you had a situation, which would be the reverse, where there's a bunch of things that members of the state board want, and they all want them at once, and that becomes then too much of a burden for OSSI. So I think there's a couple ways that could be addressed. I mean, one could be that we do what we have right now. We have the power to submit legislation to the council that would then require OSSI to submit the standards to the state board. I mean, you have to go through a process of a 2/3 vote on a bill, get a hearing, and then a markup, but that does create enough layers where, through the requirement to get a fiscal impact statement, you couldn't overload OSSI. I wouldn't want the council drafting the standards themselves. I think OSSI should do that, but you could require OSSI to do it through that current mechanism. I mean, I think if we were to entertain this, of trying to give us the authority to recommend it directly, I mean, I would want a very high threshold for the vote, like probably a super majority, like 2/3 or greater, because I really do worry just institutionally about future boards, just kind of going crazy with this and then putting too much on OSSI when this shouldn't be rushed. Each one of these should take time and it should be done in an orderly fashion. I mean, I feel like kind of again on this one, as I talked about last time, things aren't broken right now on this. We have a good relationship with them and we're moving, I think well on this. So expanding it solves one potential problem, but potentially opens up another. So, I mean, on this one, I just see pluses and minuses to trying to expand that authority. And I don't know, I just, and I guess I don't see what the problem is right now. At least not for the present moment.
Devin, did you want to?
Oh no, I mean, I was off mute the whole time. I mean, I would say really quickly that yes, I am appreciative that we have had a good working relationship with OSSI most recently. I don't know if I don't agree that systemically that's a substitute for being able to actualize work that needs to be done, right? Like almost similar to how I feel about totally different thing, but how I feel about a standalone education committee, right? Like I think that there's good work that the chairman has done. He's hired good staff. I'm grateful for some of the hearings they're having. Clearly, we've had some success with education being in the committee of the whole as an agency. And I also believe that certain things, in general could make better governance. And so I think that's the rub. I absolutely, where I do 100% agree with you, is that I would want the threshold, whatever the mechanism we decide, to be pretty high. I don't want us to just I wouldn't want OSSI to just throw stuff at us. I don't want us just throwing stuff at them. But I am recognizing that currently, if there was a problem, right? Like if there was something that folks felt really, really passionately about, or was a great need, and everybody but OSSI recognized that need, we're just stuck.
But we're not just, that we could write a bill, do a 2/3 vote, send it to council, get council to approve it, and council can require OSSI to submit that standard to the state board by such and such date.
We could, I would say we could, and in theory, that might work. I would offer that what I have most seen is council saying, I'm just gonna write a bill.
And I don't want
That
that either.
requires them to do this, which is just less, is actually what I'm also trying to avoid, because I mean there were a lot of discussions about, and I keep using financial literacy because it's something we actually got done, right? But like I literally had to go to the chairman along and like have conversations with Dr. Grant behind the scenes and say like, please let us do this, and like reassure different members that we had a productive enough relationship that they didn't need to just like legislate something. And my fear is that I don't know if it's I don't know, and I saw Robert trying to, excuse me, Representative Henderson trying to jump in, so I don't want our back and forth to monopolize, but my fear is that it become like what are the appropriate thresholds? Like how do you actually get people who should be deciding what happens when is part of my question. And if it's like you got to convince the state board and then you got to convince the council and then we got to go to the council and get them to do legislation to say OSSI please do it, but then part of the problem is they don't necessarily trust OSSI to do it, and the incentives are also such that they just say I got this thing done. They might, instead of taking that pathway, and there is actually no incentive, positive or negative, for them to do what you're describing, that they just legislate something that's could have been better. That's my fear.
And can I respond to that, and then we'll let Representative Henderson jump in. For me on this, we got 3 pathways where the public or somebody interested in this can get this done. They can go to OSSI directly, and OSSI can initiate it. They can come to the state board right now, and we can talk through our sister agency relationship with OSSI, and we can encourage OSSI to work on it with us. We could do a resolution even encouraging OSSI to put forth those standards right now. So that's upping it to another level of where we're asking OSSI formally through a resolution, a state resolution, to submit standards on something. If let's say the conversation initially didn't get somewhere, so we have to then elevate it up to doing a resolution. Then if they still won't do it, then we could consider the legislative route. The reason I do like the legislative route that we have right now, it requires a fiscal impact statement, so it prevents either the state board or the DC council from overloading OSSI with too many standards at once, because it would, if that was started to occur, it would require council through the legislative process to appropriate staff funding to be able to write those standards and draft those standards. So there's that check in the legislative process on this. I just feel like that's 4 different ways this can be done currently, each with like an element of escalation if it doesn't get done just through a more collaborative process. And I just like the collaboration is working right now. We have currently a mechanism, if the collaboration is broken down, where we can force OSSI to do it. I mean, it just takes more steps, and I guess given all the uncertainty with Congress and my reluctance to send legislation to them, I don't see the need for this right now still. But I'll turn it over to Representative Henderson and yield on this for now.
No worries.
Yeah, I
I
guess
can't appreciate the resource allocation point, but I will also yield to Representative Henderson.
yeah, with the resource allocation, like I don't want to, it kind of assumes that the state board is going to be unreasonable, right? And I don't want to that be our default. I don't see us as sister agencies with OSSI. Like we're different. We are a elected body. They are an administrative agency. And I think I totally agree that it shouldn't be a relationship based you know, getting Aussie to do things should not just be based on personal relationships between leadership, because that really limits, what you might ask for. And when there's a discrepancy between what the people are asking for, what is needed, and what Aussie leadership is willing to do, then you're limiting what you can do. And I think of the example of the accountability framework cadence. So the state board adopted a recommended cadence for revisiting that, and there's no way for us to enforce that. So there is a problem in my view, like that it's not working right now.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's the member who initiated the cadence, and I remember I remember Representative O'Leary in particular did not love the word cadence, but because of his English professor roots. One of the reasons that was important, and one of the things I had discussed with Dr. Grant, was it helped with the spirit of continuous improvement. And it also took the stakes down, given we can't amend things. Because my experience with the accountability framework and then subsequent conversations about display and design was folks felt like it was their only chance and they didn't know when they were going to get another chance. It might be 10 years or something. And so instead of like coming to the table to discuss, they wanted to go to the mat or every single thing. And I can't understand that if you're coming with an assumption that like this is your only opportunity, like it's a question about power. And so I recognize that there is a lot of distrust, and folks have experienced a lot of breakdowns as far as what they would want to realize for themselves. And I think that's where both of these come from, both the initiate and amend. I do appreciate, and I can't not appreciate, like the context. I feel like there's a lot of uncertainty around like the federal administration and the having both majorities and all the things. And I don't have anything that is more of a reassurance around that. But I did want to be able to, I think what, at least my goal for today, was to be able to just make sure any leaps in logic that we made were clear in like what problems we were trying to solve for. And so that we as members of the working group can still like discuss, like, cause I feel like it's always about solving a problem. It's not just about like, I got my thing. And these are literally the problems the public have been encountering. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I'm convinced of the problems. I guess Representative Goulet, you're not. And question for you, Representative Goulet. I'm a little unsure I'm following. You're concerned about legislation around a governance issue at this time, but you wouldn't be concerned about, because you're also suggesting that we use the legislative pathway to get things done. So you think those are kind of like technical things that wouldn't raise any adverse reaction or anything like that?
Well, so my concern is I have various levels of concern. I mean, my biggest concern would be something that which we talked about on another matter regarding the education as a civil right, would be any statute that opened up the Home Rule Act for me kind of as a non-starter, given the fear we have. This would not do that. This would be amending local law to kind of change what our agency does. I mean, that bill would have to go to Congress, and my concern about something that's tinkering with the State Board of Education's authority that gets sent to Congress, it may just give some member of Congress the wrong impression that we shouldn't exist or something, even because currently we're on a state, and they wouldn't be able to amend the bill directly. And they may not even try to vote it down, but then you could end up with some strange budget rider or something like that that gets put in an omnibus bill. I mean, we've had that happen over and over again from members that just have weird inclinations about marijuana usage in the district, even for medicinal purposes. You have people who are trying to interfere with our right to have safety cameras that record people who are speeding in our streets. I mean, those are issues that the members of Congress have actually intervened in. So I just don't see a large practical benefit for this. We haven't had in the last 2 years any instance where we've not been able to work with OSSI on this. And if we do have that situation come up, there's a mechanism in current law where we can handle it. We introduce a bill to council after we do a resolution first. I mean, you keep escalating it, and then if they don't respond to the resolution, we do a bill, and then through our DC code, we can require OSSI to submit it, and that's very different for me. Like if we pass something like council passes a bill requiring OSSI to submit phys ed standards to us. That's very different than a bill that goes up there that's changing governance roles of our agency, because it just doesn't highlight, the inner workings of our board. And it may be a non-concern. I'd rather be cautious until I see how this stuff plays out right now, particularly since there's no problem that we're trying to rectify at the present moment. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say we don't have to decide in this meeting today on all the things. But I do want to make sure that we're at least talking through and everybody is working from the same foundation of like what the recommendations are. I think what it looks like to operationalize it and what considerations went in are really good questions. And if we can kind of, so I do think going one by one is particularly helpful. I mean, I can appreciate, and I don't know anybody, and maybe it's just because of the people I know who doesn't have a certain amount of just anxiousness about, the our current political context. I think that is shared by a lot of folks, and I don't think any of us have the answer to exactly what that experience is going to be like right now. We can't. I don't have a crystal ball, but yeah, that would be my 2 cents.
Move on to the next one then.
Mhm.
We've covered.
Yeah, I'm hoping we can talk through each of them just to like get out on the table. Like if these, like, if the logic is there, and then folks can ask questions about like what was considered, what was not, so we can share that information. Is that, because that's what I thought we had agreed to for this meeting. So.
And would you like me to share my screen if that's helpful?
Yeah, if you could share the next slide. I don't know if there was anything else from folks around questions around the considerations around the first one, outside of like, going to the step of like what we agree on.
And while I'm pulling that up, I know we have just like about 15 minutes left. We do have, just a reminder, our next meeting is on the 23rd. Then February 6th, then February 20th. Would it be helpful in my notes to kind of chart out the different options, say like Representative Goulet brought up, of just like what are like 2 or 3 ways this can be implemented, and then some considerations around that?
Possibly. I mean, I think we should talk through the other 2, and then we can talk as committee members about what would be helpful next steps, if that's okay.
Yeah, and I think too, like thinking through the other options, like, because I don't know if the group is at a point where they're ready to lay out a plan yet. To sort of what are the definitive options from people to choose from just yet. But I think that may be something, depending on what the working group decides to do, to, there are some pointed questions they may want to take back to people at the next working session to get additional input on from the other members too.
Possibly. So we talked through the initiate and amend. I believe the second one was the Great Weight one. I think.
Yeah.
14.
Great weight would be up here.
Okay. So I mean, I shared what the thought was. Love to hear from folks, like their questions, reactions. Because you all's thoughts are not reflected on this slide,
Yeah.
but other people's are. So I don't want to take that for granted.
I mean, I'll just share my thought briefly on this. I don't think this is necessary at all. I mean, I think we already received great weight based upon our positions that we have. And particularly when we speak as a board in unison, I think we've always been afforded that great weight. And great weight is meaningless. It just basically essentially, people either give it to you or not based on whether they respect what the work you're doing. And I think we've already received that. And every indication I've seen, the board has been listened to on things to a great degree. I mean, it doesn't necessarily gotten us everything we want. I mean, I look here at, I mean, they use the issue of bullying. I mean, I have huge concerns about bullying, but I don't know how a resolution of the board, gives great weight and forces DCPS to do anything. I mean, if I feel like they're not listening to us, through a resolution, we escalated up to legislation, and that's where I'm at right now on the bullying issue, is it's a complete disaster. I mean, the Office of Restorative Practices is universally loathed by parents, and it's just failing kids. So, I mean, I want to look at getting rid of it and completely undoing what council's done, because I've got parents constantly complaining to me about bullying going unaddressed and being unable to do anything about it. So, like for me, that like having great weight as a board doesn't really mean anything on that. We can do a resolution, we'll get great weight, they'll either give it to us or they won't, but there's nothing that's saying that we have great weight does for that. You got to then go get it through legislation as a board.
So
I don't know what it means.
I would, first of all, I'm giggling at the idea of universal load thing, but I appreciate that is my reaction. It's like, okay, universal.
You may have heard from people that I haven't on it, but
No. I mean, just in general, like that everyone universally loathes something. I feel like it used to be Brussels sprouts, and now they're like a delicacy.
no, it's the Office of Restorative Practices now. That's
Yeah. Okay.
2025.
So I just want to clarify my reaction. But I think I also want to clarify what I think is intended by great weight. It is not consideration. It is literally the mechanism that is like, whether I agree with you or not, I have to respond to you. And if I don't respond, if I don't agree with you, I then have to articulate why I don't agree with you. I will say, as an ANC, the way this has been most effectively used, and this is not an education thing, and maybe this is not a can of worms that we want to open up, but as a former ANC, the way this has most effectively been operationalized is around liquor licenses. And so if I have a nuisance business with a liquor license, and I say I want the hours to be, I'm just making up stuff, between they can only sell liquor between 11 a.m. and 7 p.m. And the BZA decides that they're going to grant the liquor license and extend it to 11 p.m. And they have to go on the record and say why. And then all the things that I feared at the BZA hearing come true. Not that me as an ANC can do much about it, because I am part of the government and the government can't sue itself. But if I had a community group or a civic association go to bat to enforce the things I wanted, they now have things on the record that they could attack. And that is when I have seen great weight. I'm not saying I want people suing us all the time. I'm not saying that, but I've noticed what ends up happening is that yes, like when everybody's aligned on the same page, especially if, to your point, Representative Boulay, there are good relationships in place and folks are generally reasonable. Folks say, and it all works, but it's the times when folks don't respond or just say, yeah, we're not doing that. And then they don't have to say anything beyond that, that matter. That's when great weight matters. I also think a lot of ANC commissioners misunderstand great weight. They think it means that, and I can say this because I was an ANC and I love my ANC people. They think it means that they are super special elected officials that everybody got to listen to. That's not what it means. Like, I feel like people remember that they're like elected and they want to be official, but they don't remember like the public servant part. And so it's not if like, folks will talk to me as the state board president. It is more so that they have to go on the record with a response to the board. That's what's in, that is what's built in here. And we do not currently have that.
We use a current example where I think we have, a severe disagreement, with the executive branch on an education issue, and that's nurses. I mean, the testimony from all the witnesses we've heard, universally parents, I mean, this is, across the board, is that they want a full-time school nurse who's an RN in the schools. DC Health has given us the same line about how health techs and LPNs are safe, and that they would support this cluster model. So we have proposed a resolution, we received a response, it was inadequate, and now we're proposing a bill. And now we can't make them do what we want, but we've gone to the next step on that issue already because we don't agree with the agency on their answer. But we did get an answer from them. It just was a bad answer. And now we're pursuing another course, which I think is what parents want across the city. And so we've done it. So I don't know why.
I am glad
need
DC
great
Health.
weight.
I am glad DC Health answered us, and I hope no one from DC Health is watching this broadcast, and so therefore they stop responding to us because they don't have to. But I will acknowledge that in the last 2 years, we have especially received more responsiveness than we ever had as a board. I have seen that change. I do not want to I don't want to assume that's because people have to. And I don't want to assume it will always be that way. And I think that's why there are no problems. I will also just note that the board was not sending a lot of legislation before this most recent iteration. And so when I asked the question about like what thoughts aren't reflected here, what have we not considered? That as a mechanism is not something that's considered in these recommendations because that is not a muscle that we have used as a board. So I just want to acknowledge that that's not really considered here at all.
So your thought would be like on cell phones. Let's say we pass a resolution saying that they should expand their policy on cell phones from middle schools to now elementary and high schools, and they decide not to do it. They would have to then explain to us why they've chosen to go a different path than the resolution we put forth.
I hadn't thought that far, but yes, I would like that.
So,
and I think that could be informative for things like, so like, for example, when we had the working session last night and you raised a really good point that we should be considering our recommendations in line with the budget process because there are resource needs that folks could have. And so there might be really good reasons that people don't listen to us when there is like because we also are not, like, we're not in a managerial or oversight position, but we are an advisor. And so I do think there is more information that could help us be better advisors and also help other folks who do make decisions then say, all right, like, here's what we're going to do about it. So I think there is some good that could come from that.
I'm supportive of this. I mean, I'm still cautious of the timing.
Mhm.
I just, I don't see the urgent need for it, but based on your explanation of great weight, and I think I've learned a lot today about what great weight really means. It doesn't mean you kind of get, beyond the reasonable doubt,
Oh, yeah, no.
doing what you want to do. I mean, I think I'm supportive of this. I don't think it changes, the relationship at all. It just requires agencies to submit additional information to it. So I appreciate you've educated me on this, President Thompson. I appreciate that. And
That means my 6 years as an ANC was clearly was not for naught.
so I'm supportive of this. I think it makes sense, and I think we should move ahead with it if Representative Henderson also agrees.
Yeah, I am supportive. I won't argue more if you're already convinced.
Yeah.
I hope ANCs are listening to this call because I also want ANCs to understand what great weight is. It bothers me that they don't. So that is, and then the third one, that is, I can't remember the third one. Hold on, Darren sharing screens.
Data request.
That's the data request one.
And by supportive, I'm also not in a rush to do it though, because I still don't think we need it right now, to be honest.
Yes, I'm not making that leap in assumption that we have discussed timeline, what we're gonna do about it, anything. I'm literally taking it one step at a time and saying, like, do we all have the same understanding of what these recommendations are? Are there things we should consider about the implementation? Which I think for me, there are certain things like, again, the legislation lever that were not considered in these recommendations that are now part of the considerations in the discussion. So I'm only taking this as, are we on the same page around what we're trying to solve for and what can be done? That's all. Not like, okay, everybody, are we ready to do this tomorrow? I'm not.
Yeah, I heard that too.
Yes. Okay.
Yep.
I do my best to be a fair broker and representative of our conversation. So this one, thoughts, considerations, questions.
This is the one where I wanted to add something, because when I asked around about this, this kind of the prime example was just the years-long process of trying to get more data on teacher retention. And so that was a case where the board was going to first to DCPS and then to OSSI, and it taking a really long time to get data. Eventually, they began, to publish more of that, but it was truly a years-long process to get to that point. And so maybe that's a case where, things are better now. But back to President Thompson's point, I don't think we can assume that to always be the case. And that was a particularly difficult process to get that data, which we now are able to use to inform, our recommendations.
Darren put in the chat, to your point, Representative Henderson, this data recommendation and your example can be coupled with great weight. I just wanted to give voice to that. I mean, I do think I will acknowledge, and I have been on the record publicly saying this, I do think with teacher retention data, this is an area where there's more data and things have gotten better, a lot better, which is one of the reasons we don't contract out the teacher retention report anymore, because a lot of the things covered in our report were not previously captured by anybody, which is why the state board was doing a report, and now are captured by OSSI. Now, are we in a place where everybody has all the data they want? No. And can we as a board, so I guess the best example I have of us making a data request and receiving the data is actually more recently with Representative Boulay, right, and the nurses.
Yep.
I will say that was surprisingly effective. And the reason I say surprisingly is because often we don't get those types of things. I will also acknowledge that, and this is not the same, but I guess this is my, and this is why things like this still happen. So even sometimes when we ask for certain LEAs or agencies to come testify before the board as expert witnesses, a lot of times they just tell us no. And then I call them up and I say, hey, let me explain to you why this is helpful to us and what we want to do with it and all the things. And then we come to an agreement and figure out who the best person is. And that actually happens
So didn't
more
just happen
frequently.
recently? Yeah, with the cell phone thing, you got the individual
Yes.
to come in, which I think was hugely helpful.
It is hugely helpful. I think my worry though is because I don't, and I mean, I think this is a personal thing, but I think because like for me, my approach tends not to be to immediately publicly blame or shame anybody. My approach tends to be to pick up the phone and go, hey, help me understand what your fears, frustrations, hesitancies are, and let me help you understand what we have going on, and we can come to some type of agreement that is effective. I think that is a responsible way to approach things. I will also, and I believe that has been effective for us as the board. I do not say that to be like, here's why Ebony Rose is great. I say that to just point out that because I tend to take that approach, I do not want to give the impression that it doesn't happen often that folks say, no, I am not going to give you information. Like there's a lot of, you know what I mean? There's a lot of greasing of the wheels that has to happen. And I don't know. And like, and especially like considering, these are like, I could say a bunch of things about like our own capacity and my personal capacity. And what if, I said the wrong thing and that was the reason we didn't get information we need. No, I can go down the rabbit hole, but I do not want to give the impression that because folks show up now or we get certain things now, that it's all good. And that just happens and it's easy to do. But I do think that kind of information is important. And I'm not discouraging good working relationships or those types of things. I'm just acknowledging that it's not as simple as I like for us to make it look.
Well, I support the notion of you being great, and appreciate your work. I think this is, something I think that your leadership has improved for the board, but I think the way you described it is exactly the way it should work. It is, you start with maybe an email or a phone call because you don't want to call anybody out. I mean, that's how you do it now. That's how I think it should work. And then, if that's not working, maybe a formal letter requesting the information. And then if that's not working, a board resolution. Now, I am more worried, to be honest, about this going the other way than I am about an agency not giving us data that we should be entitled to. And I'll explain why. Is that once this gets in DC code, because this talks about amending DC code here, I could easily see us having a member of the state board, not a current member, but a future member who's gung-ho beyond what's reasonable and requesting all sorts of data and then citing DC code to say, you have to give it to me, OSSI, or you have to give it to me, DCPS. And it could be an unreasonable volume of data. And also, that's not our role. I mean, our role does have an oversight capacity over OSSI, but on limited issues. So like suddenly if we start sending like oversight demands for all this information to DCPS, that really is the role of the council. I mean, they oversee DCPS. We have an oversight role in education too, but it's more specialized. And I worry this could be abused instead of a reasonable back and forth that's working well right now. And again, crediting your great leadership on this for the reason why it's working well, but then also showing why maybe previous iterations of the board where there wasn't such a good relationship, why it didn't get done. And I mean, and that's that's,
So can I
yeah,
tell you
I don't
actually
know.
my so I am I'm a how person in a lot of ways. And I actually do have some, so I think my one first, I think my one edit is I don't agree that we have an oversight role. I don't feel like we're constructed as an oversight body. Um, I think when we talked about this, it was more envisioned so that we could get um, good data to make better policy recommendations. I could imagine a world where folks on the state board, especially because the public does not differentiate us from a normal, I mean, not normal, but yeah, a local school board where folks have demands. And then we start to exercise or some pseudo oversight function, which I don't like in our current, that gets funky because we don't actually have the authority to execute any of those things. So then like
Yeah.
I could, right. So like I could see a world where that got really tricky. But I do want to give voice to the fact that this was actually thought about as a way of so we could make better policy recommendations, which is like what you did with the nursing bill, right? And you say, okay, well, I need to know these things to be true in order to say what I would recommend would be best. So that's how this was thought about. The one thing I immediately thought about when we were making this recommendation, which is not reflected here, because I will acknowledge that the recommendations are a committee thing. So it's not like I 1,000% agree with everything the way it is written. I am always concerned about our ability as a board to have the capacity to do things with what we get. So like, for example, the fact that we now have, and I'm just gonna call out Kathleen because her position did not exist at all. We had the responsibility of approving standards and graduation requirements and all the things for many years before we had someone whose dedicated job on staff was to help us review and analyze policy. And what I would worry about and what I would want to, similar to what you were saying, Representative Goulet, about the, what if we just started making requests to OSSI, I would also want us to have the capacity to be able to support members with analyzing and interpreting data. Like I always want us to, like, as we advocate for different powers, because there's different types of power, right? But as we advocate and grow into different, ask for different authorities, responsibilities, whatever, I also want us to do our best with that information. And sometimes, like, you know, you can ask for data and folks say the information is out there, but it's a needle in a haystack kind of data dump thing. And I wouldn't want us to be put in a position where somebody did a data dump on us for something we needed. And then they say, oh, I gave it to the state board and we haven't heard back from them in, 6 months. And in reality, this is a part-time position with a small but mighty staff. And so that I would also like us to think about what we need. This is not a discouraging thing, but I would also want us to think about what we need to operationalize some of these things. And so I would want us to also just say, like, hey, it would be good for us to have some additional either like money to contract it out data and research analyzation, or we should have a staff member that does something like this. That would be my 2 cents. I see your wheels turning, Representative Henderson. I don't know if you wanted to jump in, but that's my thing that is not reflected here.
I don't have any thoughts on the board capacity, but I agree with you that the desire for the data is to be able to advise better, to inform our policy advice. So I just want to reaffirm that or second that.
Could we do something where, so we eliminate the possibility of one member, kind of getting out of control with this, if we are to look at this as a codification measure,
Mhm.
either now or in the future, that we require it to be a vote of the board by resolution that triggers the statute. So in the statute, it wouldn't be, and maybe this was anticipated already by you, President Thompson, but it would have to be by an action of the board, a formal action of the board to request the data. So that way we have a check in there where you're not going to have, some theoretical future member coming on, giving a bunch of data requests to OSSI that, on their own behalf, not on behalf of the board, but and then they're citing the statute saying, you got to give it to the board, you got to give it to the board, where I think we would be protected from that if the statute was only triggered by a resolution of the board, because then the other board members could kind of get a sense of discomfort with that one member, have a talk with them and say, hey, you got to tone this down a bit. You're asking for way too much that's beyond the scope of what the agency can produce in a reasonable manner. And, but that would then give us a pathway if there was truly an instance in the future where OSSI was refusing to give information to do, and I think as you wisely talked about, not oversight maybe, but almost development of the areas within our purview, like development of our knowledge in areas of standards and accreditation and things like that. So I'm open to that. I think as long as we
Go
have,
to that.
yeah,
I mean, I think we should, I mean, I always think we should discuss, just like we discussed with the, the bylaws, the SOPs, because I do believe that, I guess for me, I envision this as a mechanism to, fulfill our responsibilities. And I see our responsibilities, as the board's responsibilities, not individual members' responsibilities.
yes, okay,
And so if it's that the board has decided there's an issue with teacher retention, and we want to explore that further, or we want to make a recommendation and we need more information about teacher induction, I think it would be fully appropriate for the board to request information that would help us then say, here's what we see to be a good practice based on this. Like I don't, I'm not opposed to that. I do, and that's not to like, actually, I don't know if it necessarily comes from a place for me of like, I think people will abuse it. Now, there's always, because I think I'm somebody who believes that there's always going to be somebody that tries to abuse, like there, like there are people that abuse systems, right? Like I don't think you can ever, nobody can design a perfect policy or incentive structure or anything else. Like I remember one of the guys who wrote Freakonomics talked about how he is a world-class economist, and his youngest daughter like tricked him during potty training because she figured out the incentive structure around when she should poop, and so she was just eating up M&Ms, right? And he's a world-class economist, so I'm not the person who tries to get into like the game theory of it all. I do more so think about it like, all right, what is good for us to fulfill our responsibilities to the education landscape in the city. And I do view those as board responsibilities. So I'm amenable to that.
yeah, and I think that covers all the potential concerns then, because we would presumably, if we have a board that future board that's prudent and wise on this, they'll try first to just send an email and request the data, and then if that's a no, then the firm conversation with the president to say, hey, we as a board really need this to carry out our functions. And then if they still blow that off, then we have the ability through a board resolution to formally request the data. But I really like, first of all, hopefully we go through the much less formal steps before we do a board resolution every time we needed some data, because that's kind of silly to go to that length. It would only be needed if there was like a resistance from OSSI. And then it would have to be triggered by a vote of the full board. It wouldn't be then just one member, sending emails to OSSI and then just saying, hey, and like pointing to the statute and saying, you got to give me this because I'm entitled to it by law. They would have to go to their colleagues and get consensus to get that. And I think, I hopefully the majority of the board members wouldn't be unreasonable and, would be able to push back if that was being abused. So I'm
Yeah.
supportive.
I mean, I would say it differently. I think that because one of the things that I've appreciated, so like for example, I'm gonna use Representative Henderson as an example. When Representative Henderson has asked certain questions about OSSI, especially like more recently, and he was like, "Hey, it would be good to get this data, right?" And so we went to the leadership meeting. We talked to OSSI. I was like, "Hey, some of these things are longer things. Essentially, like we're gonna share them as email things because they're not really discussion points. Everybody just needs the information, and then the information is shared with the full board, which I think then informs all of the members, right? I mean, it could be the extra step that Representative Henderson asked, and then nobody else thought to ask. So then Representative Henderson is the only one that has that information. But I generally think it's good if folks have information that helps them make better decisions. It's kind of my thought pattern.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I read this recommendation as meaning a request from the board, not from individuals.
Okay.
And so, yeah, so that's all three. That's all of our, what we were trying to solve for, and all of the, what we proposed. And then of course, the fourth, which, is not reflected here and was not in the recommendations. It's like the statute, cleanup things. Darren, and I just can't remember if everybody was on when we were discussing this, was saying that he is going to modify one of the PDFs so we have a Word version of the statute itself, so that folks can like make comments on like the cleanup items to help us along in our work. But we didn't discuss that today. I just wanted to, and Darren, you're welcome to speak for yourself about to see if that's like helpful for folks. And that's something we can do.
It would be extremely helpful for me on that, because that's what they typically call comparative print down at the council, where you're taking the DC code and then doing a strike and insert of it so people can see what's being changed. We could start from that as a committee, and then I'm glad to work with Darren to put it into the amendment format that they use. If he would like to work with me on that. But I think that makes a lot of sense to approach it in that way. I know there's weird things in there, like having us overseeing school nurses was still one of the things we saw, which we didn't do. So, yeah, I think that's a great idea.
And I'm a little ahead of you, Representative
Oh, you
Goulet.
already did it. Okay,
Representative
good.
Thompson.
Yes, he said he was going to do it during the meeting. So,
So I
wow.
have those. I have them in Word form. There's a little bit more tweaking and formatting, but I can like add numbers to them. So there's like, we could have a red line version and then one to share out for like Bernice mentioned, we could have something ready for a working session for members to react to as well. But, is there anything else maybe that would be helpful, including maybe a shared document for thinking further on the three recommendations that Representative Henderson raised? Or is that something we should return to at our next meeting, January 23rd?
I mean, if Representative Henderson's got three more to discuss, could we get those then in email, and then we'll study those and then be ready to discuss at the next meeting? Is that a good way to go?
I don't think it's three more, right, Robert? Or excuse me, Representative Henderson?
Oh, there's no more. There's just these three.
Oh,
Yeah, like there are no
Done.
more.
There are no.
Uh, Well, and I think for me, the next piece that would be particularly helpful, Darren, just listening to the conversation with the members today, I get the sense that there are two that you all generally agree on and one that you don't, like in terms of putting into moving forward among the three. Is that would that be a fair representation of the discussion?
yeah. I mean, and I think even if I'm in the minority on this, we could hash that out when it got to the full board. I mean, we could get ready to start drafting something out and move ahead. And I just may be hesitant on that piece, but we could then look to amend it at the full board. I mean, the one thing I would be interested in doing, Bernice, and this is really a question for you on this, is I would like to try to start doing what council does with its resolutions, where multiple members can sign on to something, because it just looks classier to have people's signatures at the top, and it gives members an ability, when we work together on something like this, like group is working together on this, to put the names of the members who are kind of co-introducing the draft of the resolution name on there. And I think this would be useful for letters too, rather than just having just like the state board having the people's names. It just looks nicer. And I mean, there
You're
would
talking
be,
about the formatting of the actual document, changing the format of the document to
not the
say-
final one. So the final one should look like it does now, because the final one should be on state board letterhead. It should have that, but modeling the drafts that we introduce and we send out initially and we post to just show the members that are supportive, just to give, like, when something's a collaborative process like this, to give everybody an opportunity to have their name on it, just versus one member, which is what we have right now. There's just
Well,
a
currently
thought.
there are no member names on resolutions. There are no members,
Well, not on the final ones. I
not
mean,
on any of
signed by
them.
the president,
There,
but
there are on any resolutions that drafts that, at least in the 2 years that I've been working
Well,
on,
but we
there's
don't.
no individual members' names on, not on drafts, not on finals.
Correct.
Uh,
We don't have members' names on them. What we do record is who moves it,
yeah.
and who seconds it.
So we could
and so
have co-movers.
sometimes,
Yeah.
folks, like if it's something that I'm just gonna use Representative O'Leary because he's no longer here. Former Representative O'Leary, when he had a resolution around teacher retention, I'm like, I'm pretty sure you want to move this because that's the only way to record any pride of authorship. I think is Representative Goulet's point. But no, we don't. On the actual documents, no, we don't record individual member names. You just have at the final version the signature of the president.
Can I add to that too? Because this discussion was had about letters to like the mayor or whatever, and there was discussion around keeping the names of those supporting it. And it was moved to just getting rid of that because it's from the state board. Like the resolution is of the state board, the letter is of the state board. And so I think we've never had on resolutions individual members, but there was
Okay.
for letters at least, like this is a product of the state board.
Here, well, we could put a pin in it because I don't think it's that important. I just think it makes it look a little nicer.
I mean, I also think that's a process issue. It's not necessarily something that comes out of the working group. Like, I think if we want to change the format of how we format our resolutions, I don't know if that needs to go through the working group for that change to happen.
I mean, my thought is that it sounds like what we would be proposing here is both resolution and a bill out of this working group. So, right? I mean,
Possibly, yes. I think possibly, yes. I mean, I think that when we give our committee report out, just something we can include and just flag for folks is something that came up at the next working session. And if folks want to discuss it as an option, we could. I don't know if it has to be like a recommendation of this committee, right? But I don't think it means that it can't be elevated to a conversation amongst the board. I think we could just note it in the committee report and say it as a recommendation and see how people respond to it. So for our next meeting, because I know we're approaching 5:30, if we're not at 5:30 yet, and I'm sure folks have other things that they could be doing. it sounds like, I know that, thank you, Darren, for creating a Word document where we can do some edits, and maybe we can just talk through some of the cleanup things at the next meeting. Do we want to, I guess, continue or build on the operational items, saying like, all right, so therefore we agree, just to kind of hash out what we would recommend to operationalize out of the three things and get to a place of, and I actually don't think it would, I might change my thinking on this, but I would just like to put on the table, I don't think it would be harmful to talk about just like our considerations. Like I think that tends to be helpful. Especially if there are places we need to make a case for capacity or why we're doing something a certain way. But do we feel like we're in a place where we can start to talk through what we want the what we want it looks like to operation it. Look, why can't I talk now? Because it's 5:30. We've reached that point. What does it look like to make it work? And start talking through the statute cleanup items. Do those sound like the two things for our next meeting, or are there other things?
Yes.
Because clearly I can't talk.
I'm ready for that.
All
I'm
right.
ready as well.
Operationalize, I think, is what you were going
Thank
for.
you. I was trying.
And
I've
it was
said like
in my
5
head the
times.
whole time. So you communicated it one way or another.
Thank you. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be meaningful in 2 ways. So thank you for the grace. I think we had a good meeting. I know this was helpful for me. And excited to talk about it some more in 2 weeks.
Good.
Yeah, thank
All
you.
right. Good evening.
Thank
Bye,
you,
everybody.
everyone.
Bye, guys. Thank you.